Before the atomic bomb ever left Tinian, the island had to be broken open. At 5:47 in the morning, on July 24, 1944, the northern shore of Tinian flashed white. The USS Colorado fired first. A 14-inch shell crossed the water faster than sound, struck coral, and turned the beach into a fountain of stone, smoke, and sand. Inside the Japanese bunkers, men did not hear the battle begin. They felt it, in their teeth, in the bones of their hands, in the dust falling from the concrete roof above them. A young conscript from a farming village in northern Japan pressed himself against a bunker wall and listened to the ocean disappear beneath the guns. He had been raised around rice fields, mountain rain, and the slow sound of insects at dusk. Now the entire horizon was firing at him. Within minutes, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and aircraft began turning a 5-mile-wide island into a furnace. Shells fell so quickly that men underground could no longer separate one explosion from the next. The air became pressure, the ground became sound, and the island itself began to shake like something alive trying to throw off a disease. 9,000 Japanese soldiers were on Tinian when the bombardment began. Barely a few hundred would come out alive. That number is usually treated as a casualty statistic. It is not. It is the footprint of a decision. It is what happens when one army builds a defense meant to make surrender impossible, and another army arrives with enough firepower to make survival almost impossible. Tinian was not famous like Iwo Jima. It was not remembered like Okinawa. Most people who know the story of Hiroshima know the name of the airplane. They know the pilot. They know the bomb. But they do not know the island that made the flight possible. They do not know that before the runway became a launching point for the most destructive weapons ever used in war, it was a battlefield full of tunnels, bodies, sugarcane, and men who had already been ordered to die. This is the story of the island that Japan defended almost to extinction, and the runway built over the wreckage. To understand Tinian, you have to understand what the Pacific War had become by the summer of 1944. Not a clean chain of victories on a map, not a heroic march from island to island. A machine of attrition. Guadalcanal had taken 6 months. Tarawa had been won in less than 4 days, but the beach was so packed with marine dead that survivors remembered stepping around bodies just to keep moving. Roy Namur, Eniwetok, Kwajalein, Saipan. Different islands, same lesson. The Americans could win, but the Japanese usually would not surrender. This was not just propaganda shouted during a war. American commanders had built their planning around it because they had seen it again and again. On island after island, Japanese garrisons fought until they were cut apart, burned out, buried, or physically unable to move. When prisoners were taken, the numbers were so small they felt less like surrender figures and more like accidents. At Tarawa, only a handful of Japanese defenders survived as prisoners. At Saipan, more than 30,000 Japanese troops defended the island just north of Tinian. Fewer than 1,000 were captured alive. And the last days of Saipan did something to the Marines who witnessed them that numbers cannot fully describe. Japanese civilians, families, mothers, children, the elderly, threw themselves from cliffs rather than be taken by American forces. Marines below shouted through loudspeakers. They promised food. They promised safety. They promised that capture did not mean torture. And still, people jumped. That sight traveled through the American command structure like a warning. If civilians had been pushed into that kind of fear, what would the soldiers on the next island do? The next island was Tinian. Tinian sat close enough to Saipan that American artillery on one island could reach the other. It was flat. It was long. It was covered in sugarcane fields, coral roads, and airstrips that Japan had already begun using. To American planners, the island looked like an answer. If they could take it, they could build airfields there. If they could build airfields there, B-29 bombers could reach the Japanese home islands with heavy loads in return. Tinian was not valuable because of what it was. It was valuable because of what it could become. The Japanese understood that too. The officer responsible for defending it was Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata. Ogata was not the kind of commander history tends to romanticize. He was not remembered for speeches. He was remembered for engineering. He looked at Tinian's flat terrain and saw the same problem American planners saw. There were not enough natural caves, not enough mountains, not enough deep ravines. Saipan had caves and ridges and broken ground. Tinian had cane fields and coral. So, Ogata made the island deeper. His men dug. They cut bunkers into the earth. They linked positions with tunnels. They placed guns so that one American attack would be met not by one firing point, but by 2, 3, sometimes 4 angles at once. They buried supplies across the island, so isolated units could keep fighting even after the main command structure was gone. They turned the sugarcane into concealment. They turned coral into walls. They turned an island that looked open from the air into a 3-dimensional killing system. And then they put 9,000 men inside it. The men in that system were not symbols. They were not just the enemy. Some were veterans. Some were clerks and farmers and sons who had been fed into the empire's war machine. They had been trained to treat surrender as shame beyond death. They had been told that the Americans would destroy them anyway. They had watched the front move closer month by month until the distant war arrived as a fleet on the horizon. Many of them had probably already understood the truth. They were not defending Tinian to win. They were defending it to make the Americans pay. That was the logic. Make every island so expensive that the United States would look toward Japan itself and hesitate. Make the final invasion feel unbearable before it began. Make victory cost more than America was willing to spend. But by July of 1944, America had also changed. The early Pacific War had been uncertainty, improvisation, fear, and learning paid for in blood. By Tinian, the learning had become procedure. Naval gunfire was coordinated with aircraft. Landing beaches were studied from the air. Artillery lines were pre-registered before men ever needed them. Engineers, tank crews, flamethrower teams, medical units, Seabees, logistics officers, all of them were part of the same moving machine. Tinian was where these two systems met. One system built to die in place. One system built to keep moving. For 13 days, the island was hammered. Major caliber shells tore at the coast. Aircraft attacked gun positions, roads, fields, and suspected bunkers. The island's surface was rewritten before the Marines ever came ashore. From above, Tinian began to look less like farmland and more like a burned map. But Ogata had not designed his defense to survive beautifully. He had designed it to survive underground. So when the landing day arrived, thousands of Japanese defenders were still alive beneath the wreckage. Wounded, deafened, half-starved in places, but alive, and waiting. The American plan was audacious because it looked almost foolish. The obvious landing beaches were near Tinian town in the south. They were broad enough for an assault force. They were predictable. And because they were predictable, the Japanese had prepared them heavily. General Holland Smith chose something else. 2 narrow strips on the northwest coast. White Beach 1 was roughly 60 yards wide. White Beach 2 was only about 160 yards wide. Tiny, awkward, dangerous, barely large enough to pour a division through, which was exactly why the Japanese did not believe the main landing would come there. On the morning of July 24th, the 4th Marine Division hit the White Beaches. At first, it looked almost too successful. Resistance was scattered. Men and equipment came ashore with shocking speed. Within 2 hours, thousands of Marines had landed. By noon, they were nearly a mile inland. For veterans who had seen beaches become slaughter pens, Tinian felt like something different. The plan was working. The impossible beaches had worked. The flat terrain was allowing tanks and artillery to move. The Marines were inside the island faster than many of them thought possible. And then they reached the sugar cane. The cane stood 6 to 8 feet high. It swallowed sound. It reduced the world to green stalks, wet heat, and a few feet of visibility. A man could be 10 yards away and vanish. A machine gun could wait almost beside you and remain invisible until it opened fire. Every Marine entering those fields stepped into terrain Ogata had prepared not to stop an army at the coast, but to bleed it once it came inland. The war changed shape there. It stopped being ships and beaches. It became breathing in a green tunnel, hearing one shot, seeing the man next to you fall, and not knowing where the shot came from. Japanese defenders fired from holes, from cane rows, from buried positions, from angles that made no sense until men were already down. Marines answered with grenades, rifles, tanks, flamethrowers, and artillery called dangerously close. The island that had looked open from above became at ground level, a maze, and Ogata's machine began to do the only thing it had been built to do. It killed. But the larger problem for the Japanese was already visible. The Americans had not been stopped on the beach. The perimeter was too strong. The landing was too deep. The Marines had artillery ashore. They had tanks ashore. They had communications, medical evacuation, ammunition, engineers, and naval guns still waiting offshore. Ogata could still hurt them. He could still punish them. But he could not push them back by sitting in tunnels. So on the night of July 25th, he chose the attack that Japanese doctrine offered when the defensive position could not be restored. A mass counterattack, a banzai charge. That phrase can make it sound like madness, like a mob rushing into fire because it had nothing else to do. That is too simple. On Tinian, the night attack was organized. Roughly 1,500 Japanese soldiers moved in columns against the Marine perimeter. The timing was coordinated. The objective was clear. Breakthrough at multiple points. Cause confusion in the darkness. Get inside the American line. Disrupt the beachhead before it became permanent. For about 40 minutes, the plan came close enough to terrify everyone who survived it. Japanese troops hit the Marine lines in darkness. Some broke through. Men fought at distances too close for clean tactics. Rifles became clubs. Grenades went off in holes and foxholes. Marine positions that had seemed secure in daylight became islands of men firing at shapes moving between them. The official reports would later call the situation critical. The men in it would use simpler words. They thought the line might break. What saved it was artillery. American gunners had registered defensive fire lines in advance. When the Japanese penetration became dangerous, they dropped shells onto those lines. That meant firing into ground where Marines had been moments earlier, maybe where some still were. It was a brutal calculation, but the alternative was worse. If the perimeter collapsed, the beachhead might collapse with it. So the guns fired. The artillery fell. The attack broke. By dawn, The ground around the American line was covered with Japanese dead. More than 1,000 had been killed in a single night. American losses were painful, but nothing close to the same scale. Ogata had spent his largest organized reserve, and Tinian had not changed direction. That is the part of the battle that matters. The Japanese were not helpless. They were not incompetent. Their positions were dangerous. Their counterattack was disciplined. Their willingness to absorb loss was almost beyond comprehension, and none of it was enough. Because by 1944, the American advantage was no longer marginal. It was overwhelming. More shells, more ships, more aircraft, more trucks, more engineers, more food, more medicine, more replacement parts, more radios, more men who could be moved, supplied, treated, and reinforced. The Japanese could turn every correct decision into American casualties, but they could not turn those casualties into a Japanese victory. Tinian had become a problem of time, not outcome. By the end of July, organized Japanese resistance was collapsing. But collapse did not mean surrender. It meant the battle changed again. From coordinated defense into fragments, small groups in caves, wounded men in tunnels, soldiers cut off from officers, men without water, men without food, men who knew the island was lost and kept fighting because their entire world had left them no other category to stand in. The Marines now had to clear what remained. This was not the part of war that fits easily into clean maps. This was flamethrowers at bunker mouths, demolition charges pushed into holes, sealed tunnels, smoke, heat, coral dust, men listening to other men die underground. The battle was declared secure on August 1, 1944. The killing did not end on that day. Japanese holdouts remained hidden in the island's broken interior. Some fought for days, some for weeks. One of the last confirmed holdouts on Tinian would not be killed until long after the battle had officially become history. By then, the island had already been changed into something its defenders had tried to prevent with their lives. A base, a machine, a runway aimed at Japan. Within days of Tinian being declared secure, the Seabees arrived in force. Naval construction battalions moved onto an island still scarred by bombardment and combat. Their job was not to mourn it. Their job was to transform it. They filled craters. They cut roads. They dragged steel and timber and fuel across coral ground. They repaired old Japanese fields and built new ones at a scale almost absurd for a small island. 4 runways, each nearly 2 miles long. Taxiways, fuel depots, repair shops, bomb storage areas, housing, power, water. A military city rising from a battlefield. The Japanese had defended Tinian because of its geography. The Americans had taken it because of the same geography. And now the true purpose of the island became visible. From Tinian, B-29 superfortresses could reach the Japanese home islands and return. Distance, one of Japan's last protections, had been cut open. The Pacific was no longer a shield. It was a flight path. By late 1944, the first B-29s were operating from the island. By early 1945, the bombing campaign against Japan had entered a new phase. At first, the raids were high altitude and aimed at precision targets. Factories, industrial districts, military production. But high winds over Japan scattered bombs. Clouds interfered. Targets were harder to destroy than planners expected. So General Curtis LeMay changed the method. He took the bombers lower. He sent them at night. He loaded them with incendiaries. On the night of March 9, 1945, Hundreds of B-29s from the Mariana Islands flew toward Tokyo. Many came from the fields made possible by Tinian and its sister bases. They carried incendiary bombs designed to ignite dense wooden neighborhoods. The raid lasted only hours. By morning, 16 square miles of Tokyo had burned. Tens of thousands were dead. More than 1 million people were homeless. It was not an atomic attack. It did not need to be. The city had been turned into fire by conventional weapons launched from islands Japan had failed to hold. Osaka burned. Nagoya burned. Kobe burned. Yokohama burned. By the summer of 1945, American planners were running out of major urban targets that had not already been damaged, and still Japan did not surrender. The logic that had governed Tinian was now being applied to an entire nation. Endure, absorb, make the cost unbearable, force the enemy to choose something other than invasion. But the choices were narrowing in ways no soldier in a Tinian bunker could have imagined. In late July 1945, components of a new weapon arrived on the island, part by ship, part by air. They were guarded in special facilities. They were assembled under secrecy so strict that many men nearby did not fully know what they were helping prepare. The island that had been shelled into submission was now holding a weapon built to end cities in a single flash. At 2:45 in the morning on August 6, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay rolled down Tinian's north field. Colonel Paul Tibbets was at the controls. The aircraft lifted from a runway cut into coral and wore dead. At 8:15 a.m. over Hiroshima, the bomb detonated. A city became light, heat, pressure, fire, and silence. Tens of thousands died almost instantly. Many more died later from burns, radiation, and injury. 3 days later, another B-29, Boxcar, took off from the same island and flew toward Nagasaki. Another bomb fell. Another city was broken. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito's recorded voice was broadcast to the Japanese people. Japan surrendered. The war was over. And Tinian was left with an irony so complete it is difficult to hold in the mind. The Japanese soldiers who died defending the island failed to save it. They failed to keep the Americans out. They failed to stop the runways. They failed to protect Japan from the air. But their deaths, and the deaths on other islands like it, helped create the calculation that haunted American planners. If this was the cost of taking small islands, what would it cost to invade Japan itself? What would happen if every beach, every town, every road, every hill became Saipan, Tinian, Iwo Jima, Okinawa? The answer was never clean. It still is not. The atomic bombings killed civilians on a scale that cannot be softened by strategic language. The planned invasion of Japan might have killed even more. Both truths stand beside each other. Neither cancels the other. And Tinian sits exactly where those truths meet. A battlefield turned into an airfield. An island defended almost to annihilation. A runway from which the war's final door was forced open. After the surrender, the great base on Tinian began to shrink. The bombers left. The tens of thousands of personnel disappeared. The jungle returned to the edges of the runways. Sugarcane and brush crept back over roads and revetments. Concrete cracked. Bunkers rusted. The island became quiet again. Today, Tinian is not a giant military city. It is a small island with roads, villages, memory sites, and jungle growing through the remains of a war that once made it one of the most important pieces of ground on Earth. You can still visit North Field. You can still see the bomb loading pits. You can stand where the Enola Gay began its takeoff roll. Tourists take photographs there. Signs explain what happened. But signs cannot carry all of it. They cannot carry the men in the tunnels. They cannot carry the Marines who cleared caves and lived with what they had done. They cannot carry the Japanese families who never received a body. They cannot carry the difference between a number written in a history book and a son who never came home. Thousands of Japanese remains were never recovered from Tinian. Some are still believed to lie in sealed caves, collapsed bunkers, and places the jungle has hidden for generations. Recovery teams have searched, found fragments, identified what they could, and carried home what the war left behind. Buttons, bones, personal effects, small things that survived a kind of destruction meant to leave nothing whole. That is what war leaves after the maps are folded. Not only victory, not only defeat. Objects, silences, names no one says often enough. Runways with graves beneath them. Tinian matters because it refuses to stay in one category. It was a tactical success. It was a logistical miracle. It was a massacre. It was a construction project. It was a launch point. It was a warning. It was a graveyard. The same island can be all of those things. That is why forgetting it makes the war easier to explain, and less honest. The men who died defending Tinian were fighting for an empire that had brought ruin across Asia and the Pacific. That cannot be erased. The Marines who took Tinian were fighting to end a war that had already consumed millions. That cannot be erased either. And the civilians under the bombs that later left from Tinian were not abstractions in a planner's table. They were people in houses, streets, hospitals, schools, factories, and shelters. They cannot be erased at all. Military history often wants clean lines. This island gives us none. It gives us coral dust, sugarcane, artillery maps, burned cities, and a runway. It gives us a truth harder than a slogan. Sometimes a battle matters not because of how long it lasted, but because of what the world built on top of it. Tinian was 5 miles wide, small enough to vanish on a classroom map. But for 3 weeks in 1944, it became the place where two war machines met. One chose death before surrender. The other chose overwhelming force before delay. And when the guns stopped, the island did not return to what it had been. It became a platform, a weapon, a road through the sky. The dead did not change the outcome, but the outcome passed over them. Every bomber that rose from North Field carried more than fuel and bombs. It carried the cost of the island beneath it. And that is the part history should not be allowed to forget. The runway did not erase the dead. It carried them into the century.